I got a good deal on a computer, so I don't need you to build me a new one. It's Toshiba laptop.
Let me see that. Is this new?
No, but I got a good deal on it.
Oh god. It says Intel Celeron.
Holy cow. Let me see that.
That's still a quality CPU.
How much did you pay for this?
It's not really relevant.
Braden, it says now with Windows XP.
That was a good operating system. The value was there.
Really?
Yeah.
In which decade?
It still runs, and it was a quality deal.
Microsoft hasn't supported it for literal years. Plural. More than 2.
Time.
No, really, how much did you pay for this?
I don't. The why? I mean, it's.
Haha! Gone the episode! I get paid, suckers! Hey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
I'm Old Man Callahan.
And I'm Eric.
We are fortunate to have Eric with us today. He's one of our early Patreon patrons who's been supporting us from pretty much the beginning of the Assorted Meeples journey. Check out the link in the description below or on the screen to join our Patreon. And a huge thanks to all our patrons who have stuck with us so far. We love our community. It is fantastic. So today, we're going to be talking about a rather popular topic since really 2020 and the pandemic really shifted the need for this: how to get the most bang for your buck out of a computer. So I'm going to have Eric start the discussion off. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about the pros and cons of going with a pre-built machine versus building one yourself.
Yeah. So right now with markets the way they are, pre-built versus building your own has always been a big conversation, where a pre-built generally was a worse option if you had any kind of comfort with technology. If you were going to build it yourself, you were usually going to see a significant amount of savings if you were willing to put it together yourself, because you were paying a premium through a pre-built for something that was just ready to go out of the box without you having to know what you were doing. With how graphics cards are priced right now, post-pandemic, pre-builts are actually a much nicer option to think about. That gap is a lot smaller, because pre-built manufacturers are selling their machines with their graphics card closer to a MSRP that would be standard, versus if you're looking for this shortage graphics card, you're running into a lot of scalpers at the time. So you can get a decent computer now for fairly close, depending on where you go, to the same cost as you would if you put it together, maybe $100, $200 more. It's still definitely something that you should look into. Like, if you're someone who's not comfortable, or even when you're thinking about buying or building a new computer, getting your parts list of what you're looking for in your computer, and then comparing that to some pre-builts to see how it stacks up, so you can compare that price. It may right now be worth it for you to go with a pre-built machine for close to similar, the same price, without having to actually fight for graphics card availability, which is anywhere from non-existent to lotteries to paying a scalper twice what you would normally.
Yeah, and I think it can't be overemphasized that this is a very dramatic change that has only really taken place since the pandemic really kicked off around the world. For the last forever, basically, it's just been an accepted fact that you would get more out of your PC if you or a tech-savvy friend built it from parts. Like, parts, generally cheap. If you buy pre-built, the ceiling of what you can achieve is generally lower unless you're willing to pay way out the nose. Here, like Eric said, we're talking maybe $100, maybe $200 difference. And honestly, you're going to spend hours and hours trying to get the perfect graphics card or CPU or other scarce parts depending on how the market shifts. It kind of sucks.
Ours is a very optimistic
Yeah.
statement there. It's probably more like it can be a full-time job and or take months at this point. So
I haven't won a single lottery yet, and it's been 3 months. So
And I've won, I think, 3 at this point. So your results and mileage may vary.
there is that.
So, with that in mind, let's say that you're still dead set on building your own computer, rather than going with the easier pre-built option at this point. Where would you start, Callahan? Where does one start when they decide they're going to build a new machine from scratch?
Well, first you have to know what you're going to do, right? Are you going to be using it for gaming? Is it a workstation? Are you doing video editing or 3D modeling or any of the other things that might take more processing power? Are you building it for your mom who is just going to be cruising the internet and saving pictures and snippets and stuff like that? Then you can cheap things out. When you know what you're going to do, then you would set your budget and begin your hunt for your most important piece, which is your
graphics card. And this has been a hot point of contention for well over a year at this point, and it's that there just aren't enough graphics cards to go around. And while a lot of blame has been tossed around at crypto miners, particularly with the big crypto boom that was going on in 2021, that's really not more than a small snippet of what's actually going on. The truth of the matter is, with people shifting more and more toward work from home, the need to have a good functioning PC at home has dramatically increased. So much so that the very limited plants that can produce the needed chips to make graphics cards like the RTX 3090 that we have here on set, and believe me, I know I got real lucky even getting one of these, there's just not enough supply. They're operating at full capacity to put these out for graphics cards, for cars, for any number of technological marvels that just need these little chips in order to operate. And while the crypto market has exacerbated the problem, it's not really the source. So if you're going to get started on building a PC, the long and the short of it is determine your budget and then get a graphics card, whatever you can reasonably get. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be buying new, but if you're going used, you have to be really, really careful.
correct, yeah. You can buy used. I myself have bought more than a few used graphics cards. It's a really good option to save a buck. Someone who is getting into a 3090 or a 3080 and had a 1080 or a 1070 or a 2070, those crazy people who shouldn't be upgrading right now from the prices, are looking to recoup some of that cost, but they aren't necessarily looking to get anywhere near MSRP because they understand that that's not going to happen all the time.
Not in this market, though.
Yeah.
In this market, even the used cards are...
Depending on who you run into. There are still people who are nice who understand that they'd rather get closer to what it should be worth than what they can get out of it. There's plenty of people who would rather sell the card they bought for $800 for $600 to get rid of it, to just know that it's going to go away. But with that, you need to be looking at your card to make sure who you're asking the right questions to this person. Are you buying someone who this is one of their 6 mining cards that have been running for the past 2 years nonstop that have 1,000 hours on each one already at max capacity? Is it just some kid who decided he wasn't interested anymore and is selling his old machine that he got a couple years ago, and you're getting a snap up on it? My brother, for example, has a computer with an old 6970 in it that he doesn't even know exists, that I know my parents would move for someone willing to get it out of their house, probably. You'll run into those sometimes. And if you don't need a top-of-the-line gaming machine, if you're someone who's just getting into the game and just want to be able to play stuff on Medium and start experiencing PC gaming culture and stuff, that might be a good move for you to find someone's old rig that they're getting rid of, rather than buying everything straight up.
Right. If you don't need 4K resolution, you don't necessarily need a 3090, right? And you probably don't even need a 3060. There's plenty of
you can get away with
2060 Super, or
26. Anything in the 2000 series you'd be happy with. Most of the 10 series would work more than what you need to play modern on 30 to 60 FPS. Depending on what you want.
Being fair, nobody really needs a 3080 or a 3090 unless they're getting into doing things like streaming or are an enthusiastic hobbyist of PC gaming. And even then, that's not a need in most cases.
It does provide a time savings for certain things like 3D modeling and rendering and stuff like that.
Right. If you're in it for more of the superior workstation where you do a lot of modeling, you do a lot of video editing, then a high-end graphics card like this makes quite a bit more sense. You can still step a step or two down if you need to, but it makes way more sense to make that type of purchase if that's what you're going to use your PC for instead. All right, so we've covered where to start. So now we're going to focus on the next areas that you'll want to make sure that you don't skimp on. Now, we're going to have a couple different opinions here as far as the next parts that you want to be sure that you don't skimp on. So without further ado, Eric, I'll let you go ahead and start with where you think the next major purchase needs to be made on this machine we're building ourselves.
Sure. My biggest, most important thing to not skimp on is a power supply. Now, that comes in a couple different directions of what not to skimp on and why. One, you don't want to get a power supply that's too small unless your budget is too small that you can't spare it. Because then you can't upgrade later, as Callahan can attest to when we had to make his $400 budget work, so we got a power supply just big enough with a little bit of headroom to run everything, and then he slapped 6 hard drives in it and it wouldn't run anymore.
Oh, it ran most of the time, but then it would shut off at random moments.
Yeah, when you suddenly 6 drives spooled up.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you want to give yourself room to grow if you're going into a build knowing you're going to use it for something else than what it was originally built for, you're going to want to get a better power supply than you think you need so that you have that room for the extra draw. The other reason to not skimp on it is you want to go with a reliable brand unless, again, you are working on a shoestring budget. An actual named brand, Corsairs are great. Thermaltakes have good warranties, so even when they're a little wonky, you can get them fixed. Rosewill's honestly the lowest I'd recommend going. That's Newegg's in-house brand. EVGA is a good brand too. Yeah, EVGA. But like Power Bank or Jimbo's power supply, something that you've never heard or seen of before that doesn't have a power rating on it,
maybe skip that one.
Yeah, it's the heart of your machine, and if it goes wrong the wrong way, it takes something with it when it goes.
Now, if you're not familiar with power supplies, the best baseline to go from is to start at 750 watts. You can go higher and sometimes need to, but that's generally the lowest wattage I would recommend.
If you're exception, if you're getting a modern graphics card. If
Yes.
you're getting an older graphics card, you could probably turn that down to like 650.
I still wouldn't.
Or if you're getting a workstation where the graphics card is a side thought, basically, so that you can maybe watch a movie on it. If it's something for your parents or your sibling or a kid who doesn't really need any, if it's a graphics card that you're putting in it because it's secondary and it doesn't need power run to it and it's just running off the motherboard power, you can go with a 500, and that's fine. But then you're going to want to look at the secondary part, which is the 80 plus rating, which comes down to how power efficient you want it to be.
But that gets tricky too.
It does. I recommend an 80 plus gold at least.
That's where I get my most bang for my buck is in the gold rating. You're not going quite up to titanium or anything like that, where you're just really you're paying out the nose for something that you're not really reaping in terms of what you're saving from the cost of electricity.
And in bigger power supplies too, it's honestly hard to find ones that are less than gold when you're getting into the 1,000, the 850s. But smaller as you can, and that's can make a price difference.
But you still have to be careful too, because they can get their efficiency rating up. Like this goes back to buying from an unknown distributor. They can get their efficiency rating up by cheaping out on the capacitors, so that its efficiency is still technically good, but when you actually have to draw a higher amount of power, it can't get you there.
Correct. I would take a 80 plus bronze EVGA over an 80 plus gold of a brand that I'd never heard of before.
I did have good luck with an off-brand one that I had. That was for my Plex server. I switched it out because it was shutting down, and I went with it was $100 850, and you gave me a lot of crap on this because it was a Century Montec Century power supply that he had never heard of.
Don't know the name of it still is not a great sign.
And he but he's just like, what the hell were you thinking? I've told you not to do this. And I was like, it comes with no, you said, does it come with a warranty? I said, it comes with a 5-year warranty. At which point he did back off. Now, after about 3 to 6 months, it started basically just shutting down randomly again. So I was just like, oh, Eric was right. And I just bought an EVGA, swapped it out, and it continued to shut down because I didn't do my due diligence and actually look at problems. I just assumed that Eric was right, which you should never, ever assume.
You should never assume the person who looked at nothing is right, yes.
And, yeah. And that's the CPU cooler just happened to crap out. So,
The other thing I recommend that you don't skimp on is make sure that you get yourself some form of SSD. And that's just my put your OS on an SSD. M2 or standard, that's just a quality of life. Get yourself at least a 500 gigabyte SSD. You'll be much happier for it. You can always add more hard drive space later when you need it.
And they're pretty affordable. Make sure that your baseline is at least 500 gigabytes for that. You can get up to 2 terabytes pretty easily without breaking the bank.
Oh, although prices are on the rise from Chia mining. They're actually driving the cost of hard drives up now too.
Yeah. They fluctuate a little bit, but generally you could get a terabyte for $100.
Yeah,
I think right now they're up to like 100 to 120 per terabyte, but that's still.
Yeah.
It's not like the graphics card markup that went up by like $1,000. You're talking you're going to drop an extra $20.
Yeah.
Which.
Right. But the point being, you get a lot less bang for your buck once you leave 2 terabytes behind as of this recording, which is summer of 2021. So, yeah, definitely make sure to pay attention to that.
And you can still get multiple drives, right? Unless for some reason you need them all in one unit.
You can get multiple drives, and for your secondary stuff, you can go with a standard mechanical hard drive again if you want to. but you'll be a lot happier waiting 20 seconds for Windows to boot up than you will be waiting 40 to 60 plus.
Yeah, ain't no doubt.
Constant updates are less annoying when they're just done.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Now, the other item that I would personally say not to skimp on, and this comes with a couple caveats, is the motherboard. And the reason that I would say that you don't want to skimp on the motherboard is it is one of the central components of your computer, and if you're getting to the point where you're going to be upgrading the motherboard, there is an extremely high chance that you're going to be looking at upgrading the entire PC as a whole. So my general thought is, if you have the budget to put a little more money into your motherboard to make sure it's easier to work with, or that it's got extra features like access to M2 slots, that's worth your time, in my opinion, to really make sure that you don't cheap out on. It's not necessarily as important as something like a power supply or an SSD from a functional standpoint, but it is important in terms of an upgrade standpoint.
I might disagree with certain parts of that, just because short of getting the right socket type for the CPU range that you're looking at, and getting like you have to have PCI Express 4, right? So for what you're doing, it matters for me not as much. Actually, the only thing that I would care about when I was looking, if I was meeting that requirement where it had the right slot and I knew it could support the CPU that I was hoping to put in there, the only thing that I would probably look at that point is, does this have enough USB ports, or that I would be looking for, because I've done it before where I've got one, I was like, oh, it has like 4 ports and 2 of them are 2.0.
Don't look at me. I cheap out on my board all the time. That if it has the minimum requirements I need that I want, I'll even buy an older version board that I have to flash the BIOS to get it up to an upgraded version to run what I need. But we have a new update from Windows going to Windows 11 that makes that an even bigger issue to keep an eye on, where you need to make sure you have a board with the right security features now.
Well, yeah, but we got time.
Sure, but cheaping out is now a thing you need to pay attention to.
Cheaping out now, right? I was going to say, for us that already have builds in place, it'll be good through 2025, is it?
Correct.
They've
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and the security standards that Windows 11 is asking about are stepping away from security standards that weren't necessarily in place through the mid-2000s. So you can still cut a corner or two on a motherboard with that in mind, but the problem with that is the more you cut corners on your motherboard, particularly in deference to the socket, the lower your ceiling is for being able to upgrade certain parts of your computer later. Which is why I say, if you're going to be upgrading the motherboard, you're probably building a new machine. So if you want to avoid that, that's where I'm really coming back to when I'm saying, don't skimp on your motherboard.
Well, okay, so one more thing, though, with this. We're talking about bang for your buck. Now, you got a Dark Hero 8.
Yeah.
Right? Now, you could have the money you spent on that, if you dropped your price by a couple of $100, like half, you would still have a working motherboard that did what you need, and you could put that money towards paying a scalper to get a better graphics card.
You could do that. And the Dark Hero is one of, if not the most expensive boards with its particular socket set. But there are a number of more affordable 550, 570 options for your socket. And those are all still perfectly fine. I picked this board because I also wanted the convenience features for layout and getting things set up.
I'm the guy over here who's like, well, now I got to pay attention to old Ryzen boards that might not have the right chips on them when Windows 11 comes out. So we're all in very different houses in this one.
And that's why doing your due diligence is going to be such an important part.
Do your research.
Research!
If you're not sure if something's going to work with what you're doing, resources like PC Part Picker are going to be your friend, where you're able to just plug in a bunch of parts and see what's compatible, what's not. It will solve a lot of your issues if you're torn between a few boards while you're doing research.
You still have it's a wonderful tool, and I love that website. You still have to take some of it with a grain of salt. Like,
Yes.
I've had it tell me that it was incompatible with certain things. I was like, yeah, there's no way. So I ended up buying them anyway, and I was able to make everything fit, even though it told me that it would.
Well, and because sometimes you need to have a little bit more than the average. Like, it'll say it's incompatible for BIOS flashes as well, like what I do.
Right, it gives me that warning a lot.
Correct.
It's like you're buying an old chipset, and warning, it may not be compatible out of the box. You have to do that. But so far, every motherboard that I've gotten has had a. But I haven't gotten them used off of eBay or something like that, which you can save money getting a used motherboard.
Yep.
You can.
I mean, and I would trust that more than a graphics card for sure.
Just be prepared to test it upon arrival. Don't just set it on a shelf
Yep.
and let a money back guarantee expire. Because if you wait 2 months and then, oops, it doesn't work, well, you're out of luck.
Have your graphics card first.
Fair enough. So we've talked about areas where we don't feel that you should skimp. Let's circle back to the areas where maybe you can save a buck. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Well, to go the opposite direction, my favorite place to skimp, that is the hardest to deal with later, so I bring it up as an initial build skimp, is your case. I love skimping on my case.
He really does.
If it can physically fit in there, I am happy to pay $20 if it'll physically fit in there. Now, I bring this up as someone who's been building computers since I was in high school, so 15 plus years. You get used to the cuts and the sharp edges, and nothing has easy plug. But if it's someone who's just going to put it under a desk and it needs to work, and you can put fans in it, instead of spending $120, I'm spending $20 on a case. I've saved $100 on the rest of the build that I can put into that SSD that I wasn't sure if I was going to get. Bumping up from 8 gigs of RAM to 16 right off the bat. Or right now, maybe going for that 3070 instead of a 3060. I know the other easiest thing to upgrade, if you can get it, if you find one. The other easiest thing we can all just instantly agree on without even argument is RAM. The RAM is the easiest upgrade. You can start
with the lower clock memory.
Any novice can plug RAM into a motherboard.
Fewer sticks. Two eights instead of...
Right, you're not going single channel.
No, but duals into 2 8s that you can move into 16s.
Right, or a lower speed memory that you later upgrade. And actually, although I'm not on the cutting end of like gaming by any means, I haven't noticed a lot of difference between like the higher speed RAM and the lower speed RAM. And
depends on which version of lower speed you're talking about.
Like 3200 versus 36.
But DDR3 versus DDR4.
Oh, right. Okay, yes.
There's a big
Depending on the
difference there.
motherboard that you get, how old you're getting. I hadn't even considered DDR3 at this point.
We're recording on a machine that's using DDR3 right now, so that is a very relevant point.
I've made replacement machines for people who didn't need top tier gaming. There's one upstairs that's not set up in Shane's office that's DDR3 that I think the whole thing $300
Nice.
with graphics. It doesn't have a top of the line graphics card, but it has something that'll play.
It has
stuff.
a display output.
It'll play games.
Mm-hmm.
It'll play modern games on it. They're going to be at medium, but they're going to be on. They'll go at 60 frames though. What do you guys skip on other than RAM? Since we all know that's.
I have skimped on the cooler, and I paid the price. I happen to have a replacement cooler just laying around that I got in trade for some other services. For somebody, I patched his carpet, and he gave me a CPU cooler that he had lying around, and I happened to be
bought Jim Bob's random CPU cooler.
No,
I see.
it was an up here, which is not, from what I have determined, the first one just died. It's not really or a quality CPU cooler, but the price of free is pretty good. He gave me one that was new in box. He had never used it, never got around to building his PC. And now...
Hand-me-down parts are always worth using to skimp.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and it meant that I didn't have to like wait for anything. Once I actually did my due diligence and I fired up a monitor and I said, "Oh, that's odd. My CPU is getting over 90 degrees." And then the whole thing shut down. I was like, "Oh, neat. I think my CPU cooler is dead."
I did used to skimp on the CPU cooler back when, you got one included. I would happily throw the stock on there to save the 20, 30 bucks.
See, and here's the thing. The stock cooler is more than sufficient unless you're redlining your CPU a lot. Like it's going to keep it under 70.
That's a thing of the past now, though. They don't include stock coolers if you're buying new.
It depends. The Ryzen 5s don't.
Ryzen 5s don't. Ryzen 3s did. They're thinking about taking them off of them that they were printing. They were making.
I got one. I never used it. I went for. And here's the other thing. I guess we could go like AIO coolers versus liquid coolers versus just a stock like radiator.
Yeah, radiator versus AIO.
I use AIOs not because officially they are more efficient. In fact, in a lot of cases, they're just not. But I think they look cool.
A showcase computer,
right? That is literally my only reason for buying.
They're easier to put on than a radiator too.
It depends. Well, I guess it depends on the radiator.
Yeah.
So,
as someone who has a budget radiator versus a budget AIO, yours is easier.
Okay, good to know. I put on Braden's, which was a Noctua. That was nice.
Yeah, with the budget ones, you have to change the back plate. Don't forget to do that before you do everything else, because then you got to tear the whole thing apart.
He's right, and also there's the little protective film that you have to remember to take off of the CPU cooler, otherwise you're just running that up against a piece of plastic.
How about you?
We've all done it.
I mean, one of the other areas I cheap out on hard drives. I have mechanical hard drives all over the place at this point. If you're looking at something that's not an SSD or an M2, storage is cheap. You can always upgrade it later without trying too hard. Ditto for any peripherals you're thinking about, like if you're looking at card readers, those are things that you can save 30, 40 bucks on here and there. And if you were looking at 6-7 peripherals that you don't need but are in the nice to have column, that adds up real quick.
Now here's something that you guys might disagree on, I'm not sure, and I know a lot of people will. Fans. I buy cheap fans. I have never had a problem with any of them. Now, granted, I spend some time looking at reviews, and I wait until they go on sale, like you do with your case. So I was like, this is still not... It's not a piece of crap, right? But when I see them, I think a lot of the fans that I really like I've spent like between $5 to $10 a fan.
That's a middle of the road fan. That's not even a cheapy fan though.
Well, I don't want to go like less than that, or it's just
You can skimp a little there. You can't skimp all the way down.
I've seen some fans that cost. When I'm looking at it, I was like, this is stupid.
Noctua fans are $20 a piece,
and they look like poop.
Oh, but they're gorgeous.
And they're quiet.
They're quiet. They'll run for.
I've gotten some that are quiet, but also I would like to. I did this on the previous one where we actually did your PC build. Noctua, for the love of God, why do you choose those colors? It looks like baby puke and shit.
Beige and brown, yeah.
Sorry,
it goes with nothing. I've never found anything that matches it.
I can't make a good looking. It's like you're deliberately trying to make the computer build look bad, and you make me feel bad and made me cry.
They don't like the growing fad of glass side.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Stop looking in there.
This should all be solid metal.
Put your shinies on the outside. I guess that's your peripherals thing is something I didn't even think about because like I am happy to cheap out on a keyboard depending on when I'm getting it.
Same.
Yes.
I am happy for knockoff mechanical switches in a keyboard versus spending $200.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
And a lot of the things that we're saying are good to cheap out on during an initial build are conveniently also the things that are easy to upgrade later if you decide not to cheap out on
Not
them.
necessarily the fans.
Not necessarily the fans.
But you'll have to replace them eventually anyway.
But right, they're gonna die, and at that point, you're probably upgrading your cheap case that you got, so you might as well just swap them all out.
And when you, like several of our friends have done over the past 6 months, accidentally spill coffee on that keyboard, it feels better when it's a $30
Yep.
cheap mechanical, and then you're like, well, crud, I guess I'll buy that much nicer keyboard I'd been eyeing that I didn't get when I couldn't afford it at the time.
It's true.
And I'll be sure not to spill coffee on it.
Yeah, which I may have done with, I believe it was called Hero Hawk was the brand of my cheap mechanical keyboard that I replaced recently with something much nicer.
I don't even use a mechanical keyboard. That's how cheap I am. I
Gross.
use a Logitech mouse keyboard combo. That's how cheap I am with my peripherals. I don't think I've spent more than $20 on a mouse keyboard combo yet.
Look, I'm still using the same lighted keyboard I bought back in 2013. It's a Logitech. It runs. Ta-da.
I mean, that's not to say that I wouldn't take one if somebody wanted to, say, give me one, or if I could do, like, trade work for one. Like, get one on the cheap. But I'm cheap.
Sure.
Which,
Hand-me-down parts are still good ways to skimp on spending money.
Right. What do you think the easiest thing, aside from RAM, which is always going to be the easiest thing to change out, what is the easiest thing to swap out later then?
Graphics card.
Hard drives.
Really? I'm gonna agree with him. Well, yeah, no, I'm still gonna agree with him. That's just one slot. You got multiple cables. He's just got a slot and a couple of switches.
Well, technically I have multiple cables too.
Well, if you're talking hard drives, you're literally unplugging two cables that are already run and plugging in those same cables back into a new hard drive.
Or you're adding a cable and plugging it in. He's
Yeah.
right. His isn't much harder. Mine, it depends on if you've already got the power supply. If you already have your power supply ready to upgrade, it's very easy.
I was happy with swapping out my power supply. When I did it, I opened up the case that you had suggested, and there was actually enough room. I was able to pull the power supply out without removing any of the parts and get everything else plugged back in, and it was a 25 minute 25-minute swap. So that was not as nearly as bad as it could have been. But then again, it was fully modular, so I didn't have to deal with the extra cables and stuff like that. I just pulled out what I needed.
Correct.
What do you go with for a power supply, or do you care?
Modular, it usually costs more. So I usually don't go modular unless I'm already spending the money on it anyway. Like if I have to, so for example, Braden's newest build where we're getting 1,000 watt, it was a $10 difference.
Mhm.
Right.
If it's something that I can cheap out a little bit by not getting modular, I'm willing to put in the work. New people probably wouldn't. It's a lot more cable management. It's a lot more figuring out what goes where.
It is. Now, semi-modular is actually you get kind of in the middle there, and you always know you're going to need the motherboard power anyway.
Your 24.
It's right. It's not like you're going to be able to not use that. So I was like, it might as well just be attached, right? So, yeah.
Well, fair enough. Well, we've, I think, covered a lot of good tips here for how to build a good PC without overspending or blowing a budget. So now we want to hear from you. What tips are you thinking of that we didn't necessarily cover that would be good to pass along to prospective PC builders? Or are you just one of those people who's jumped on the train of buying the pre-builts at this point? We want to know. Let us know in the comments below. And until next time, great gaming!
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.